Well, hello and welcome to another episode of God Day. My name's Hugh Alexander Jackman, and I hope to bring you a word of spirit and life that will help you today. We all need a bit of encouragement, don't we? Even just to get through our day. And I hope that this word will be one that is encouraging to you. I want to talk to you today about the subject of the born-again miracle, the born-again miracle. You know, when Christians talk about being born again, it's often a bit of a mystery to people who don't know anything about Christianity. I know when I first heard the phrase, born-again Christian, I had absolutely no idea what it all meant. And I wonder if you're someone who's maybe just landed on this channel and you've heard the phrase bandied about to be born again. Maybe you've heard people speaking about it in terms of an experiential thing. Like, you know, maybe they went mountain climbing and felt like they were born again, or maybe fell in love with someone and felt like they were born again. There are lots of ways people think about it. But did you know that there's a biblical way to think about it? And did you know also that it was the Lord Jesus Christ himself who spoke to us about the subject of being born again? Indeed, it was the center of the reason why he came to earth, was to show us the kingdom of God. And the only way to see it is actually to be born again. So I'm going to be talking to you today about what does it really mean to be born again? How can you be born again? How does your life change when you're born again? And I just want to share a few personal experiences that I've been through, things that have happened to me as a result of being born again. And how I can say to you today that I am truly born again, and how being born again has really made a difference in my life. So if you're somebody who's had some questions about that, I pray that this program, the next, 27 minutes or so, will be very eventful for you. That there'll be rich moments that will fill your life with something that will really, really make a difference. Okay? So, where do we start with the subject of being born again? Well, believe it or not, it begins with words. Getting born again, or becoming a born again believer in Jesus Christ, begins with words. And that makes a lot of sense to us who are Christians, but maybe to people who are not Christians, it doesn't make a lot of sense at all. How can a word change my life? How could a word change your life? I think we've all heard words that change us, haven't we, over the years? I think if we really admit it, you know, there's that old saying, isn't there? Sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never harm you. But it's a lie, isn't it? I mean, words really do harm you, and words really can change you. I wonder if you heard words when you were a small child which changed the way you think, or the way you act, or the way you behave. You might have had somebody said to you when you were a small child that you'll never amount to anything, or you'll never be anything in life. That could have changed you. You know, somebody might have said something very hateful to you. That may have changed you. Somebody might have said, shh, don't tell anyone about what I'm going to do. And their actions might have changed you. Now, words, they do affect us. They do change us. I particularly remember my dad in later years. I remember having a conversation with my dad about words. I remember saying to him, I remembered that when I was younger, I remembered you really, really pushing my elder brothers, particularly my eldest brother, really pushing him to get good qualifications and do well academically. And I remember saying to him, why didn't you do that with me? Because I didn't really get a push the way my brothers did. I remember thinking as a small kid, oh gosh, when I get older, I'm going to get it from my dad. He's really hard on that. You know, he gave him the speeches about Martin Luther King and how if we wanted to amount in this world, we had to be somebody special. You had to have qualifications. But I remember my school days were just not as heavy. My dad just kind of left me alone to do whatever I wanted. And later in life, I remember saying to my dad, why didn't you give me those words that you gave to my eldest brother? Why didn't you push me more? And I'll never forget my dad's response. He said to me, I didn't push you because you didn't need to be pushed. And that always stayed with me. It was like a mark of respect from my dad, that he knew something about my life, that the way it would turn out, that I had no idea about. And he gave me those words later in life. And those words changed me and made me think better of myself, I could say. Maybe it was the words from a book that you heard that made you think differently about yourself. Maybe it was a poem or a quote by somebody famous. Maybe it was the words of someone like Martin Luther King that made you rise up. Maybe it was a sports person like Muhammad Ali. He was somebody that spoke words that changed a lot of people's thinking about themselves. Well, the Bible speaks of a living word, and that living word is Jesus Christ. And he came to earth and became flesh and dwelt among us. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, the living word, and how the living word began to come to me, and how that living word coming to me changed my life. I also want to look with you at a scripture from the Bible, which is the story of a man called Nicodemus, and how he came into contact with the living word, and how the living word changed his life as well. So it began for me when I was about 29 years of age. I was sort of seeing a young lady, and we were in an apartment one evening, and I suffered what I now know as a panic attack. And I didn't know what it was. We had been indulging in things that young people indulge in, and I didn't know any better. Doing things and smoking things and just sort of having fun. And in the midst of this time of fun, I had what was described to me as a panic attack. Well, I've never known fear like that. I had no idea what was happening to me. And this young lady was very scared as well, so we ended up calling an ambulance, and they ended up taking me to a hospital. It was somewhere in central London. And while I was there, they kept me there for a long time and did all sorts of tests on me. And then a young nurse, she couldn't have been 25 years old. She was a very young girl. She came into the room and she said, well, I've got all your tests and your results back. And I said, go on, doc, hit me. What's wrong with me? And I think one of the things that was on my mind was I'd seen my dad have a heart attack. And I think I was genuinely afraid that maybe I might be following down that road. I was only young, I was only 29 years old. But that's how fear can get into your system and affect you. And so she came and said, well, according to this report, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. And we think that you have suffered what is known as a panic attack. I said, well, I have no idea what that is. She said, well, and she explained what it was. And I just sat there and thought, this is incredible. How could I be having this? And then this young lady, she said something to me. She used some words that left me perturbed, all right? She said, you know, I'm surprised at you. And I said, what do you mean, surprised at me? She said, well, if you don't mind me saying so, she said, I've got a lot of friends who are from sort of, where are you from, the Caribbean? I said, yeah, well, my parents are. She said, well, I've got a lot of friends who are Caribbean and African. And well, a lot of them have faith. And I said, what? She said, well, a lot of them, they go to church and they've got faith. I'm just surprised thought maybe you might have as well. And I thought to myself, I remember sitting in that hospital thinking to myself, hang on a minute. I've come here because I've suffered something and I'm looking for some medical help for whatever it is I'm suffering. And you're telling me about faith. Anyway, they took all the stuff off me, the ECG things, and stripped it all off me. And I walked out of that hospital thinking to myself, what was all that about? But there was a question on my mind, and the question was, what's all this about faith? What's she talking about, this faith thing? And so in my daily life, and at the time I was a sort of full-time music producer at the time, that's all I did. A wannabe producer, let's put it that way. And I would go in the studio and we would make songs. And in between the songs, I would sit there and think about the words that this nurse had said to me. I wish I could find her today. Just sitting there thinking, what does she mean by she's disappointed in me or surprised at me that I should have faith? These words, they seem to just sort of haunt me. I'd heard a word from a nurse, but ultimately it was a word from the Lord, and it was a word that would ultimately lead me towards becoming born again. So I began to ask people, what's faith? What is faith to you? Then, at about 30 years of age, I was in the studio one day, and there was a young man called Jack Rubin, and he was what they call a mic MC. So he did reggae music and what they call a chatter, or a mic MC chanter, or whatever you want to call him, a toaster we used to call him in those days. Great artist, very, very talented. And we'd just finished doing this track, really fun track. It was called Anna Nutton. Those might understand that, Patwa. And then he said, I got this friend. He didn't say it like that. He spoke in quite a raw Jamaican accent. He said, I got this friend. His name's Steve, and he's a born-again Christian. And I thought, what did you say? He said, my spa, Steve, is a born-again Christian. I said, a born-again? I said, what's that? He said, well, he goes to church and he has faith. I said, he has faith? He says, yes, he has faith. I said, okay, I need to meet this guy. So surely I did meet him, and we became friends. And I went to his house, and he had a studio there, and I sort of was strangely looking for this thing called faith. It's the strange things that you do when you're on a pathway looking for God. I'd be with him. He'd be making music, I'd be sitting in the studio listening to what he does, and we just got on. But I never asked him that question. I never asked him the question about what does it mean to be born again. I just kind of hung around him and hoped that one day I might see this thing called faith, or see this thing called being born again, which I really didn't know what it was. And then, of course, some years later, some months later, I should say, because I was 30 when this happened, I heard another word. And I was in Barbados at the time. I was on a beach in a place called Bathsheba. And again, I was with my girlfriend, and we were filming a massive rock that was jutting out of the sea. And as I was filming this rock, I heard someone speak to me. I literally looked around thinking, who said that? And what I heard was a voice that said, I'm going to make you like that rock. I'm going to make you like that rock. Well, interestingly, I said that to my girlfriend at the time. I said, you know, I just heard someone say, I'm going to make you like that rock. And I think quite rightly, she probably thought, there's something wrong with this guy, he's not well. And, you know, a little while after that, I became unwell. I was literally bedridden for the rest of the holiday. And what had happened was I got bitten by a mosquito, and it was carrying what they called at the time, dengue fever. And I had literally been knocked out with this fever. I didn't know what it was. I was just grievously sick. And so I returned to the UK and went to bed. And literally for 2 weeks, I laid in bed with no contact. Somehow, and as things happen, we sort of managed to separate, myself and this girl, and the next thing I knew, I was on my own. And found in my apartment an album by a lady called Aretha Franklin. There's a long story behind that, but it just happened to turn up in my apartment. And so I put it on and just began to listen to it in these days of feeling rather sick. Now, I'm about to tell you about the next time I heard a word, and it was actually on this record. I'm laying there one day, listening to this album over and over again. I just play it over and over again, feeling very sick and very, very sorry for myself. And maybe you're watching this program, maybe you're watching from bed. Maybe you're feeling sick and you're feeling very, very sorry for yourself. Maybe this horrible pandemic that people have been catching, maybe you've caught it, maybe you are feeling ill, maybe you need some encouragement. Well, I can tell you I was as sick as a man can be and could hardly move. I was in such pain. And I heard this voice saying, you know, talking about Jesus and his blood and singing a song called Walk in the Light. Walk in the light, beautiful light. Talking about shine all around us by day and by night. Jesus, the light of the world. It went something like, walk in the light, beautiful light, shine all around us by day and by night, and so on and so forth. Jesus, the light of the world. And the music began to touch me, but I didn't know why. I didn't know how, and I didn't know why. So as I said, I literally laid there day after day. Eventually I got a call from my workplace, and they said, you're going to need to come to work, back to work, otherwise you might lose your job. And so I got in my car one day and drove. I had recorded the album onto a tape, so now I'm driving my car and I'm listening to the album. And somewhere on that journey between Essex and Uxbridge, where I lived, I ended up on the A40 and listening to those words about Jesus being the light of the world. I pulled my car to the side of the road and literally said, Lord Jesus, if you are real, and if all these witnesses that I've heard, if all these words are true, would you just help me? And I had about 30 minutes in the car where it was like time was snatched from me for 30 minutes, where all I can remember is crying my eyes out, my shirt being dripping with tear water as I poured out these tear water coming out of my eyes, and my eyes firmly shut with this presence in the car with me that felt like the sun had come into the car. not the S-O-N, the S-U-N. And it was passing over me with waves, these slow-moving waves. I'm sure some of you who are watching have experienced something like this, and you know what I'm talking about, these waves just passing over me slowly, as if passing right through me. And those waves were passing over me, through me, and the waves seemed to be communicating something to me. What I was hearing inside myself was, I love you, I accept you, and I'll help you. And I kept having this feeling that something unclean was being washed away from me. And it kept making me cry all the more. And the more this feeling came, the more of these waves of love and acceptance came, the more I cried. And this lasted for 30 minutes. And at the end of it, I began to feel as if I'd cried so much that I think the tears there was no more left to cry. I understand that where the Bible talks about when David cried at Ziklag when his family was taken away, and that David and his men cried until there was no more strength to cry. I was like that. I had nothing else left in me to pour out. There was no more tears to cry or to pour out. And at that point, I felt as if this presence was starting to dissipate. And I said, I didn't want to open my eyes in case when I opened my eyes there was no one there, but I sensed for the whole time, for 30 odd minutes, that someone was sitting in the back of the car. And I desperately wanted to turn around, but I couldn't. When I opened my eyes, I looked around and there was no physical person there. And I looked up and there was no sun in the car, there was no heat. But then I looked out the window of the car, and the world was completely different. I mean, everything was different. Colors were different. I remember seeing to my left of the car, there was a tree, just a tree, an ordinary tree with green leaves. And I remember sitting there looking at this tree like, oh my goodness, it's a tree. It felt as if I had seen a tree for the very, very first time. And then I remember reaching into the glove compartment of my car and taking out a packet of a container which had in it diazepam. You see, when I was suffering with this illness and previous to that, I had been very stressed. I was permanently stressed and actually quite ill for some years. And people said that I had yuppie flu or ME, I don't know, all these different terms that they used. I ended up going to a couple of quacky doctors and they gave me uppers and downers. I didn't know at the time, but that's the sort of medication that they give to people who are mentally ill. I didn't know that at the time. So I would take these downers, these diazepams. This quack doctor advised me to take the diazepams with some wine at night, and that will help you to sleep. And I used to do that. So I used to drink copious glasses of wine and Jack Daniels and these diazepams to get off to sleep. And I remember taking these just without any thought whatsoever. I just reached into this glove compartment, picked up these 2 bottles of uppers and downers, opened the window and just threw them out. And I was pretty dependent on those tablets at the time, but something on the inside of me strengthened me and I was able to throw them out the window. Cut long story short, by the midnight of that day, I heard a final voice. Strange thing happened. I had a backache and had called an osteopath. And he said, you need to come and see me. Actually, it was the next morning. You need to come and see me first thing in the morning. I went to see him. His name was Dave. I wish I could find him today. And I sat with this osteopath telling him all about what had happened to me the day before, the story of my encounter with the car and so on and so forth. And at the end of it, his wife was sitting there in a wash of tears. And I said, what's the matter with you people? And this osteopath looked at me and said, Hugh, he said, you're born again. I said, what? What are you talking about? He said, what happened to you? You were born again. I said, what? Like Steve? What like this? How did it happen? I'll tell you how it happened. It happened through a word. Well, I can't tell you all the details of that story because time won't allow me to tell you the rest of it. But I will say this to you. You've heard a word today. And if you want to be born again, or if this word is in your heart, all you need to do is speak out to Jesus as I did. You don't even need to pray a special prayer. All you need to do is just say, Lord, if you're real, come into my life and help me. And if you're genuine about it, you'll be born again just as I was. God bless you. I hope this has encouraged you and helped you today. I know it has encouraged me. I know that you will be born again by the Spirit of God. See you next time on God Day. Bye-bye.